wore Pink Floyd for the ENFPs.
You represent, Dario.
Yeah.
Bringing out your fun side for all the ENFPs to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so today we will talk about the ENFP subtypes, starting with the dominant. And Dario calls this the crafty producer.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So just some things to say about ENFPs from the start. This was one of the very first types to look at in terms of, in fact, the very first one, just to break it down into 2 subtypes and then into 4 early on. And unlike INTPs, which we talked about before, where I felt the INTP subtypes are all like great examples that are like pretty obviously different from each other. Pretty much all of the ENFPs have a starburst pattern somewhere in there. So they all have this creative element to them. It's just some of them, it could even be like a hidden starburst. So it's like pushed way down. They're only doing that in more private time. But there is this, like sometimes good luck guessing the ENFP subtype from the outside. I think that there are some things that people can go on, like if they know Enneagram and they see somebody that's an ENFP that's like maybe 7 wing 8 or 8 wing 7, and be like, oh yeah, that's probably dominant. But otherwise, it's a little bit like you need to spend a few minutes for sure. It's not like an at first sight kind of thing with ENFP. So nonetheless, there's definitely clear brain wiring differences, despite them all having some kind of starburst somewhere sometimes. So crafty producer. I happen to know somebody who's a film director and producer in Hollywood. He's done some reality TV, coached reality TV, which I think a lot of it is probably coached. And he came to mind as we were talking about today. And so what is it? Well, they're definitely more driven and confident than other ENFPs. And part of it comes down to, each of their functions, extroverted intuiting, introverted feeling, that are both have this driven, focused, analytical yang quality to them. So they know why they're there and what they're doing, and they are focused on that. So they can have like a marketer, energetic energy on the outside. They tend to have that, but at the same time, they're not really that scattered. Like they do tend to be pretty focused. Besides being confident, I would say that they can be pretty entertaining when the situation calls for it. They can be quick to decide, talkative, good leaders, managers, like this one, a producer. So literally sitting in a director's chair or, arranging for a movie to be produced, and making all of that happen, like working through all of that. A lot of that is working through others. So they're using their extroverted thinking, the third function with all of the types. It's very useful to talk about the third function. Often that also is in like a managerial kind of role. And so they're organizing others and pushing and being persistent. Because they have that extrovert intuiting there, they're probably using a bit of, how can I say, like convincing other people, getting buy-in from other people to do stuff, getting other people excited to do things. But they do the work and put in hours too. I mean, no question about it. I would say that they're probably the least creative, ironically. And in the way that creative means, like, in my mind, is something innovative or completely different, they're much more about saying, you know what, this is what has broad mass appeal. So this is an ENFP that understands mass appeal. And it's not that they don't tell the joke that nobody understands unless they deliberately want to tell a joke that goes over everyone's head, except for the one person that they want to have understand the joke. But they really are ones to be like, this is a genre, this is a kind of product, this is a service that works, and we know how to make it work. And of course, they're going to put their own individual quirky spin on it and stuff, but they're still essentially, they're doing another version of the Mona Lisa, and can be quite successful at that. But it isn't like they're coming up with a completely brand new thing. That's often, in terms of, thinking about intuiting types, especially dominant intuiting is creative, can be, honestly, in my opinion, a little bit what if it's overconfident or present that way, and less perceptive then especially the harmonizing, so the one in the opposite quadrant, the harmonizing. And we talked about this with INTP, like the harmonizing INTP, very good at perspective shifting. The dominant is probably the least at every type. And it doesn't matter. I'm not picking on ENFPs here, just all of the types. This is going to be the case. In the sense that they see what their feeling directs them to see. And then that's it. On the other hand, they're really good at saying yes, saying no really quickly, likes, dislikes, very solution focused. So it's not necessarily about discovery or interaction, why they're there, whatever that is. It's experimenting, expression. No, a lot of it is just like, this is this thing that I want to make happen, and let's make it happen. How do we get there? Not a lot of patience for nuance. Very focused more on what they see as going to work. And then the last thing I would say is that, for every type, that there's like a more ideological version, which isn't necessarily about subtype. But here among the ENFPs, if there is one that's ideological, more likely, driven, like involved in politics or whatever it is, they're more likely to be this dominant style, because their introverted feeling is really clear on what they believe and what their aims are. And then the marketer energy is out there to get some kind of result, to make something happen.
Absolutely. And so we also talked about how the dominant subtype of ENFPs, they can have these ideas that they want to bring to mass audience. It's like, I want to make this a reality, and it can be quite grand and lofty. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they might even live like they have that lifestyle before they do to
Oh,
to
that's
get
so true. Yes, absolutely. They know how to put on the like drive the expensive car and then live at like this little like mouse hole of an apartment, because they know what it takes to put on the show to convince people.
Yeah, exactly. They know it. So that brings us to the creative ENFP.
Mhm.
Dario calls this the eclectic wanderer. And so this type of ENFP is more creative and sociable and more ADHD than, but
Yeah.
even so, adding on to that.
Yeah. That's like a bonus ADHD. Yeah. It's both situational and lifelong. Yeah, for sure. So they have this sort of marketer energy on the surface that's like eager and interested, and they're um engaging people with energy, and at the same time the introverted feeling is more of this romantic style that shifts to whatever situation and relationship and the mood of the moment or the mood of the city or whatever it is. So they shift very quickly between things. And we could say experimental, I think quirky, sometimes bizarre, sometimes like genius. And it's not just, unlike some ENFPs who may be just about ideas, these ENFPs tend to be the ones, and I know a number of, I mean, it's probably the type I know the best besides my own. Um, they can be painters, musicians, like all of these things, and bring in stuff that is both meeting sort of the needs of, it's like with painting, and like combine that with some sculpture and creating a space that's interesting to go through. And all of a sudden they're like, like, why have a regular art gallery? Like, can't we just make the whole art gallery like an experience with like interactive video, and people can like interact with objects there, and say it's a art gallery that also like brings in this music, and they can have a live experience. So the ENFP is like, imagine what if. And they often have the energy, especially if then they're in the right place, to make that happen. Sticking with it, however, is a challenge. And if they don't have the infrastructure or the connections to make it happen, then it's something that just sort of comes into their head and out of their head, because they're like, oh, that would be really great. I think the challenge, because the introverted feeling is one that is so, like changes with the weather, that they can be very erratic, random, moody, bohemian. whatever it is, going from the one thing to the next, living from one place to the next. I think it's a subtype that benefits a lot from being in the right place. Like the dominant can be sort of feeling like, this isn't a great place for me, but I'm really clear on what I believe in and why I'm here and what I'm doing. And I'm going to organize energy around me in a way to make it work. The creative is like, wow, this either like we flow together with the environment or we don't. And they're gonna hightail it out of there at some point if it doesn't work. They can fall into a funk. The quality of their relationships matters a lot. And I've also noticed with this subtype that they're the kind of ENFP most likely to get in trouble with the law. But often not really terribly to their detriment, because after all, they still are ENFPs, so they're going to make a story happen that hopefully is, to their liking. And I don't mean like thieves and whatever. I'm just saying like, oh, like why not just cross the street here? I don't see the point. Or I should be able to walk my dogs here. Like just thinking like the rules are dumb and like nobody's looking, so who cares? And then there's always some Karen in the background. So the Karen is the creative ENFP's arch nemesis. And but they clash up against each other really well, like they're equals there. And I think they're really great at putting on a show. And that can mean in the general sense of NFs of like, I'm wearing a mask in my life temporarily for this situation, but it can also mean like theater and acting. And like, as long as they cultivate the self-control. So I would say each of the subtypes of the ENFP has a challenge that's about their character. For the dominant subtype, the character comes up a number of ways. I would say the main thing for dominant is really checking for them to check, is what I'm doing ethical? And am I giving people credit where credit is due? For the eclectic wanderer, the creative ENFP, a lot of it is about self-control and having the discipline in order to actually stick with something until they can become not just using their talent, because this ENFP can literally pick up a guitar in like 2 months, or 2 weeks, they're going to be somewhere singing and playing a song, in a bar or something like that. And you're like, wow, how do you get all that confidence? Whatever. Well, they're just the energy, like, I go do this. But do they actually stick with it long enough to get good? So that's why wanderer comes in. It can mean traveler, but it can also mean when they get older, and I have met them, they're in their 40s, their 50s, even 60s. And they have a whole lot of a little bit of everything. And so I think that's that other part of the challenge that's there. But very, very talented. I mean, it's walk into their house or their studio or whatever it is, and you're like, wow, okay. And they do have this really great, like when they are disciplined, they have enough discipline, then they have some really nice like infectious energy without people feeling pushed or corralled or anything. People will feel like, yeah, this ENFP does care and is interested.
Yeah, and so it seems like the creative ENFP is the most stereotypical ENFP of all the subtypes.
Yeah.
They're the caricature.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. And I think some of them, grow out of that, and others, like balancing out, say grow out of it in the sense of like balancing it with the other facets of their type. Because the subtypes are not really subtypes, they're just facets of the type. And then there are others who I think, especially normalizing and harmonizing, that especially the normalizing one doesn't actually get picked out as an ENFP. And so people don't have that idea in mind of ENFPs because that person just doesn't stick out to them as an ENFP. Whereas the creative version is the most likely to be very obviously an ENFP, like the David Kiersey version, the Isabel Myers version of ENFPs. Like, this is it.
Yeah, they're the stereotype, the picturesque.
Yeah, yeah. And for ENFPs who are listening, if you're wondering, like, maybe I'm the creative, maybe not, you're probably not. because like you would have to be like double or triple X version of, I mean, strength of ENFP to be here. Like really roller coaster of a life is what I would say. Like roller coaster of a life.
Makes sense, makes sense. And so that moves us to the normalizing version of ENFP.
Mhm.
Dario calls this the secret agent. And so, yeah, this version of ENFP is more specialized and conventional in comparison to other ENFPs.
Yeah. And I suspect this ENFP is far more common than people think. Um, they may even be, one of those ENFPs who discovers type much later in life, or sort of has a side interest in psychology or whatever it is, but um, because they fit in well with whatever it is that they're doing, that there is this like highly adaptable quality that's there, that they just sort of can fly under the radar. So that's why I call it secret agent, because flying under the radar doesn't mean that they're smothered by society. They continue to be ENFPs. I have known ENFP, at least one, maybe I guess two, actually, who are in the military, um, and they were quite proud that the system didn't break them. I mean, they survived in it. Just to step back a little bit. So let's say, what is it? What is their style? So they have this kind of extroverted intuiting, which is more quiet. It's not as verbal and as physically expressive. It's more about observation. And the example I remember that popped out so clearly, sort of brain-wise, is when we had it in the lab. This is like years ago, and the ENFP student is sitting there between tasks, and I see her brain gets very, very active, and she's just sitting there. And I ask her, like, what are you thinking about? And she said, well, I'm looking at the other two students over there, so at the other side of the lab room. And I'm imagining the different conversations that they could be having based on what she's observing from their behavior and so on. So this quieter version of ENFP, um, in fact, I would say this: when an ENFP is being quiet, watch out, because yes, they might be introverting, but it's more likely they're actually still extroverting, but just not in a waving their hands, talking kind of way. So they're very much paying attention to the dynamics of the environment and what's going on. And this ENFP, like if they're in an office, they know every single issue that every person has in the office, not because they're gossips or they talk a lot, but because that person comes up to them and every person is like an open book. It's just like, oh, and this is the same with harmonizing. It is just like everyone is so obvious. Like the way they talk, the way they hold their hands, like the way they direct their attention. Um, all these little things. It's like they just peck out the stories. They're sitting there and they just see all these stories around them. And they're like, there's the story of this and the story of that. And I myself have experienced this because I was with an ENFP for a long time, and really got this like, just let's sit at the coffee shop and observe the street and the people around us and all of that, and wait for the cinematic moment to happen. Not meaning that there's a car accident or whatever it is, but viewing it as if it's like a French still life painting. And where is that moment where everything is like, oh, that's what that is. That's what's going on with those people. And there's all these stories around. So this yin extroverted intuiting is so good at seeing those stories, not imposing them on other people. Although when push comes to shove, and if they are like in a role like a therapist or facilitator or something like that, a manager, and they need to sort of move things around, they're going to pay attention to the energy in the room or at the table, and they're going to tell some jokes, and they're going to accidentally bump into somebody and sort of move what's going on and move things. But this is not, they do it in this really nice, quiet way, and it's like, don't underestimate how perceptive they are. And that's sort of what a secret agent does, right? Like they're going around and they're observing to gather information, and I think the other part of secret agent is that they themselves, in order to remain in this normalizing, say, corporate environment, an ENFP trapped, and I've met this as an accounting manager, like a manager of accounting department for years. Like, how do you hang on with that? Well, you got to make your life interesting and not just outside the office. Like, it's got to be interesting inside the office. Now, going back to what is the third function, um, and how that can play out. How this often plays out here is pretty good technical skills. And I do know personally, I've worked with ENFP who is normalizing and ENFP who's creative. Tried to work with dominant ENFP. That was like a no-go. I mean, it was fun, but it could not be long-term. This one is Subtype is good with things like charts and diagrams and action plans and flow charts. They can be trained as a scientist, as a lawyer, as an accountant. They're probably not doing accounting day to day, but they learned that at some point. Banker, soldier, whatever it is, and they learn those things. And that becomes part of their, it's not necessarily about managing others, although it can be some elements of that. But there really is this, like, the extroverted thinking is directed to survive within the normalizing environment. And a lot of the extroverted intuiting is about observing. And then what's so strong that is missed is the very quiet, deep, introverted feeling that's there. That the family life matters, the community matters, their like significant other and relationships, like those matter. Like they are committed to those things, those relationships, and whatever else that they've committed themselves to, and they have staying power with that, which is what allows them to get through a lot. Unlike the creative subtype, with the sort of yin romantic kind of introverted feeling that's just sort of great for playing lots of different characters, in different movies and plays and books and whatever. Imagining every moment, like, if I were this other person. I mean, yeah, they could do that in their heads, the normalizing version, but they do have this strong core that's like, this is me, this is what I'm about, this is what I'm dedicated and loyal to. This is what matters and what's important. And that's behind, so this sort of like observer style of interacting. And they actually interact a lot, so they put in humor and they make suggestions, and people feel this warmth of energy. But I do think that this secret agent can be easily mistaken for INFP. They're not, because when you have to ask, where is the neurotic zone, and their neurotic zone is still with extroverted thinking, not introverted sensing, so which would be INFP. And the other is that when they need to extrovert, they do so really well. All of a sudden it's like, yeah, this person is not so quiet and sedate after all. Like, they know how to make things happen, they know the right things to say with strangers. Like, all of us, oh, we need to secretly sneak into the museum. Oh, no problem. Because all you need to do is act like you belong there. And then you walk in. And so, yeah, we're going to use our extroverted tuning in some, like, lots of little fun ways in our lives. But it very much is still, like, at the center of what it is that they're doing. Yeah, I talked a lot about normalizing. I know normalizing. I know one who's a lawyer, and how it works for her to be a lawyer. Everything from the drama of the courtroom, but the courtroom is not every day. The fact that she has a kind of clients that are sort of like short term, like the story of each client or client's family has a beginning, middle, and end, and then you move on to the next ones. So there's an entertainment quality to all ENFPs. And I think a little bit of this bled into descriptions of ESFP over the years. And both of them can have this entertainment quality, but ESFP is more about having fun, and ENFP is more about being mentally entertained or entertaining others mentally. And as long as the work that they're doing for the secret agent is entertaining, then whether it's in a small way or a big way, then why not? Whereas the dominant ENFP is about a lot about entertaining others. I don't mean throwing parties. I mean things like media. And even when I talked about the dominant, so both the normalizing and dominant have this like focused, analytic, introverted feeling, and can be more ideological in their flavor. The difference between them and, again, INFP or say ENFJ is that the ENFP almost always remembers that they're playing a role in a story. Almost always. Sometimes they may forget, but usually not. So even when they look really, the introverted feeling is like, yeah, that isn't a real introverted feeling if you're seeing it on the surface. That's like extroverted intuiting playing out a story. The actual really important stuff will be kept hidden. And so that's something, and so I spend a lot of time on it because with normalizing, because I think there are a lot of normalizing ENFPs, and they still also can have a starburst pattern. They have a creative side, but that is not usually something that will happen at work. That is something that's more in that moment of reflection to come up with a creative idea to solve a problem at work. But that's like just in this little moment, or it's something that they do, at home when they have like their special time to themselves.
You're very knowledgeable on this subtype of ENFP.
Yeah, I do know some. So it's yeah.
It seems like they love observing people and then making mental connections from that. And
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like that's one reason why the people around them, regardless of the other people's types, the people around them will be like, yeah, actually, she's like about the ENFP, she's like really smart. Even if that person is, quote, simply a housewife or something that like that, they're like, no, 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 she's actually really smart. Um, and that will come out in talking with the person. Like maybe they're not technically knowledgeable about this subject or that subject. It's not like the NT or ST kind of interest, but there is because of the perceptiveness, they're just like, yeah, there's all this like BS going on. I'm just going to step right over that.
Yeah, ENFPs can really be a renaissance man with their many interests and things. And so
Yeah.
you mentioned how ENFPs are entertaining and that's left out of the descriptions at times. And yeah, I do find them to be very mentally entertaining. And I feel like if people only see them for their entertainment, they can be a little bit off put by that. They're like, I am a human being, but people, they're friends with me. Are they only friends with me to be entertained? And so you can
Mhm.
get some paranoia around, not paranoia, but you can get an ENFP who is entertaining but may not want to be a person's entertainment source.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
just that to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
Um,
and, and I think that's definitely, at times ENFPs are like, why am I the one doing all the work in the room? Even if it doesn't really feel like work a lot to them, but when the situation is chronically unpleasant, like emotionally unpleasant, or the mood is unpleasant, um, and they want to be able to be relaxed with people. I'm just saying about ENFPs in general. Like they don't want to be on the defensive all the time because they're not extroverted feeling types or extroverted thinking types or whatnot. There's this element of wanting to enjoy life and explore life, and to use David Kiersey's example, like the puppy that sniffs around and is checking out all these different things, is just like, is it done in a low key kind of way, like with normalizing, or is it done in that like really sort of stereotypical, I'm going to say high key, but that sort of misses it, extravagant kind of like a creative subtype. Um, and so it's more like this the expression, and that's at the end of the day what these subtypes are. It's like, how does the type express itself?
yeah, well put. That brings us to the harmonizing ENFP. This is known as the dedicated advocate.
Hmm. So yeah, more empathic and reflective. And to just sort of like recap the brain patterns and how this one is different. So with the dominant in all of them, it's like biased towards the front of the brain, and that's why we have the fast reacting style and the confidence. With creative subtype, there's the starburst pattern that is connecting everything all at once. Every part of the brain wants to be involved all the time. With normalizing, there's much more linear step-by-step connections, which we might think, well, no, wait, isn't that supposed to be sensing or something? But I think that misses an understanding of how the brain works, because there are particular regions of the brain that are clearly linked, I mean, to correlate with activities like inference making, hypothesizing, noticing patterns, making analogies. Like I can point to parts of my head and say, like, not that just making an analogy is like one region of the brain. It's not, but where is there significant involvement? So each of these things by themselves is a resource, and the linear sort of normalizing ENFP connects and uses those resources in a sort of step-by-step way, whereas the, say, creative ENFP is just, yeah, like, let's get every creative part of our brain in the room at once. Now, with harmonizing, what we often see is this diamond-shaped pattern where there's some kind of mode. There's a network in the brain that's strong. I mean, everybody has some kind of like diamond-shaped networks, but or a lot of people. But front, back, left, right, so that when they get into this mode, there's this sophisticated understanding that is both analytical and it's holistic. They're interacting with somebody else, and they're also observing and making inferences and making adjustments sort of quietly as the interaction happens. So it really is, there's this comfort with complexity. And I don't mean complexity like sciencey stuff, although it might be, is just, I mean, more in the sense of subtle or philosophical, managing a lot of variables at once, while at the same time being very facilitative and holding space for people rather than the dominant style of directing them. So the dominant style is the one most likely to sort of be overconfident and sort of egotistical, because none of us have ever met an egotistical ENFP or ENTP, have we? Um, I mean, that it happens. I mean, there's egotistical version of every type, and that's where that side comes in. But then the harmonizing is like amazing because they help others while at the same time being in this role that feels very relational and supportive and quiet. And there's a big focus on ethics and integrity, of keeping like a small social circle of intimates. And this again reminds me of the hormones, Dr. Helen Fisher's work. And if the dominant has this testosterone like energy, or animus in the Jungian sense kind of energy, and the creative is very dopamine oriented. And gosh, well, people think of dopamine as something physical, but actually we have dopamine receptors in our brain in both the motor cortex and in the prefrontal cortex. So it can be both ADD and whatnot, can be both the dopamine in terms of something physical and being restless and needing to get reward and stimulus through something exciting and dangerous, which is more extroverted sensing, or through mental stimulation and interest in lots of different ideas and stuff going around. And so that's more the ENFP style there with the dopamine. And then serotonin as for the secret agent, which really is part of that. I'm the seeing themselves is part of something larger than themselves, not directing it necessarily because they're often in a support role, but there is purpose in being part of something larger, whether that's the family or the organization or the community, whatever it is. And then with harmonizing is oxytocin or estrogen, and there is this more close and like supportive, and maybe not physically touching people, but this closeness that happens. And that's what they focus on, is the commitment to the quality of those relationships. Even if it's, and very often could be a temporary relationship. So to give some examples, so this is probably the subtype I know the best. Um, and this is very much the subtype that will observe from day to day that there's, say, like a homeless veteran on the street, and simply decide one day that now feels like the right time in order to assist that homeless person. Not homeless people in general or having any ideology or plans about it, but saying, I'm going to help this person and bring all of their ENFP superpowers to bear to make that happen. Which, there's the rapport building process, there is the sort of guiding and growth process, there's the advocacy that happens there. So the advocacy isn't usually for something ideological, because they're very yin holistic style with both of their functions. So they're the hopeless romantic, and they're observers, and the whole thing is just so fun, is like going through the story of life. And there are so many wonderful movies that capture this. The experience of living this kind of person is like, British aristocracy, and then this other kind of person, and then is like homeless person, then it is this, and then is that. They're not actually living those lives, but there is, like a joie de vivre that comes from interacting with the people around them, and wanting to those to be like quality interactions, to know, like, am I really meeting this person at the version they're they're creating the best experience together, in this world, in this life. um so there is that one, and that's why I think that they make such good therapists. Like this, the harmonizing ENFP was just like popped out of the womb ready to be a therapist. And even if there's not their job, that's in practice like what they do a lot of. Yeah. So again, I've talked a lot about it, but it's, yeah, very, very yin like, ENFP.
They are the confidant ENFP that is a natural therapist without even trying. Thank you, Dario. That was very comprehensive. The next question I have for you is, what general patterns do ENFPs share, or themes do ENFPs share regardless of their subtype?
Mm. Well, one is that I wore my Pink Floyd T-shirt, thinking about that we were going to meet today about ENFPs, just because I felt that would be something fun, not like literally psychedelic, but as one ENFP said, like, oh, I don't need to try drugs. Like, my brain is like so weird already all the time. And I think that that's a theme of the type. They're like, no, 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 I don't need any more. Or if they do, it's like, yeah, I'm definitely going to go on like a real, like, even more than they normally would, because their brain, the way it works, can just generate all these different ideas and adventures and stories and perceptions, and even perceive differently how they perceive. Um, and there's sort of the central theme of exploring their perceptions, even running experiments around them and trying stories to see, like, oh, maybe this person said that they like such and such. Let me sort of wait until the right moment that emerges to allow me to test this characteristic they claim about themselves, to see if it's really true. And I phrased all of that deliberately that way. They're not going to be like, oh, we're going to set up an experiment in a lab and like send people through it, although they might do that, if it's, schoolwork or something. But really, there's this willingness to just be, and the same for ENTP, like, let's stay very vigilant to potential possibilities, to the moments, the magical moments that arise, and either like really like bring out that magical moment, or be very attentive to flow with that moment. I mean, they can have a little bit different philosophies from one ENFP to the next. The dominant ENFP is more going to be the one to like try and deliberately create magical moments. The harmonizing ENFP is going to be most likely to feel like, forcing it like ruins the magic. So it just should, well, not should, but like, hopefully, ideally, it flows all on its own. The magical moment. So, a magical moment is definitely a theme for them. Noticing others' potential for good and evil, for disaster and success. All of these things. I mean, it's what. I mean, sometimes, there's quite a number of NFs that I think will say this, but ENFPs in particular, like, they feel like everybody just wears their psychology on the outside and doesn't even realize it. And like, people just go around with like little placards, or like the game characters with like a little thing above their head that tells you like what they are and what's going on with them. Um, their story of what's going on. The ENFP is like, oh, that's so obvious. Like, how embarrassing for that person, like whatever it is, or how cool. I think that there is a desire to share the experiences with other people, to share the magical moments with other people, to be able to be honest and open and vulnerable with other people. Like, the introverted feeling wants there to be like an authentic sharing of experience. Um, I think that the ENFP superpower, which not their main one, but one that people often miss, is remembering again they have extroverted thinking, and that they really can actually get organized and manage quite a lot. I mean, I've seen literally an ENFP be incredibly disorganized in everyday life, given the charge of, this is not the producer ENFP I talked about before, a different ENFP, given a job where he has to manage like 100 people for 2 weeks and does an amazing job with it. And there's just a tremendous amount of extroverted thinking that's happening along with the extroverted intuiting. And it all just happens. The organizing, the managing, like boom, 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 boom. Or you think like, oh, this person is just sort of floating around and they're fun and so on. And then you find out actually that their knowledge about something is actually extremely deep. And they really can actually get quite technical about it if you want them to. So there is this capacity, it's a sort of hidden side of being able to manage, like juggle quite a bit at once. And then, there is this dream of the white picket fence life, and or whatever is the equivalent these days. I don't know what like millennials and Gen Z dream about, but there's like this constantly a little bit, there's like a nostalgia for the past, or nostalgia for like a life that doesn't exist, that they don't have, that would be very settled, and yet at the same time knowing that that's not them, and sort of balancing those. So I think those are some of the like major sort of like themes for ENFPs.
Yeah, you've clearly spent a lot of time around this type, and your Pink Floyd shirt shows it. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I find ENFPs, a shared commonality is an optimism that comes from being able to think of ideas. And so that brainstorming creates you can see the good of the situation too. And
Mhm.
so ENFPs are very good at a whole at cheerleading people to reach their potential.
Mhm.
And so there's also that.
Yeah.
And
And I would say one thing is, people should not be misled by an ENFP's sort of high optimism and maybe Pollyanna or naive appearance, because actually they can be. Remember, their flip side is like ISTJ, which is this side that's like coldly, these are the facts of the situation as they actually are. And the ENFP can, with that capacity to be split off, like knowing that, like, oh, I'm in a stage as this character with my name, and I'm reading the script, and I'm wearing these clothes, and I'm using these props, and I could be using some other things. So there's always this little bit of awareness that there's an actor, and then like, oh, the stage ends over there, and if I'm not careful, I'm going to like literally fall off the stage. I'm not saying that they're aware of that all the time, because ENFP is a type that will actually literally fall off the stage by accident. Um, but there is this just like I said, like they may surprise people by how well they can manage. They can surprise people by how well they can put on their realism hat.
Mm.
Like all of a sudden, the ENFP that you know is like, no, we're going to get serious for a moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. And so thank you, Dario, for coming out and sharing your wisdom on the ENFP personality type. If you like this episode, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.